Well, we're going to kick off with the outsider's guide to Adam Bandt and the Greens. As we've often said on this program, the ideology of the Greens is misanthropic, socialist, self-loathing and contrary to the national interest. But even we were surprised at how far Greens leader Adam Bandt would go to put the boot into his own country. As the Sydney Morning Herald reported last week, Bandt was invited to the South Korean embassy in Canberra to address the country's MPs via video. This follows the announcement a month or so ago by South Korean President Moon Jae-in that his country had established a target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Now, we'd expect Adam Bandt would use an opportunity like this to trash Australia and deride the Liberals' energy policies and the Nationals' energy policies, but he didn't just stop there. Nope. At the same time that China was imposing crippling trade sanctions on Australian exports, Bandt actually urged South Korea to renegotiate our trade deal and use its economic clout to punish us. These are his very words. Not only do I ask that you work to get your government to stop buying Australian coal, but I also encourage you to agitate, to renegotiate our free trade agreements in order, he said, to include carbon tariffs against us, against Australia. He went on to say, we have no carbon price anymore, so we need a price signal on our dirty products. You heard that correctly. Adam Bandt wants to wipe out our fossil fuel exports to impose his philosophy, and he will sell out Australia to do it. That's an extremist and a fanatic if ever I saw one. He's also a disingenuous character. This is what he told Sky in 2012 when he was elected deputy leader for the Greens.
I think because we have such a core set of values and people will know that we'll stand up, push for things, that we won't be extreme about it.
I don't know about you, but I'd call betraying my country extreme. And in addition to being disingenuous, Adam Bandt's also a hypocrite. Remember his reaction to this several months ago?
Abbott has now been appointed to the UK's Board of Trade.
Bandt tweeted, "Strip Tony Abbott of his prime ministerial pension. The Australian public should not be paying him to promote the interests of another country." Well, I'll say this about Tony Abbott in his new role. Unlike Adam Bandt, he's not advocated UK-imposed crippling tariffs on Australian exports. And if Bandt had any principle, he'd forego the $300,000 plus salary that comes from the earnings of Australian taxpayers, including the fossil fuel industry, if he's going to continue shilling for foreign countries to our detriment. But in hindsight, we shouldn't be surprised at Bandt's extremism. Remember earlier this year when he was elected Greens leader? This was his very first press conference.
Big business that makes its money by killing people and endangering people's safety should be worried, right? Anyone who makes a profit by putting people's lives at risk should be worried because their days are gone.
And earlier this year, he gleefully tweeted words to the effect that members of the Liberal National Party would one day face a criminal court in what he termed would be, quote, climate trials. But we are talking about the same man who in 1995, when he was a student at Murdoch University, wrote an article ostentatiously titled "Towards an Anti-Capitalist, Anti-Social Democratic Internationalist Movement." In this, he identified Bolshevik Leon Trotsky and declared that the parliamentary road to socialism is non-existent. And given Australia's minute contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, what is Adam Bandt's grand plan to tackle the big emitters? This is what he told ABC a year ago. See if you can get through this excerpt without giggling.
If I was Prime Minister, I'd be saying, let's get Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand, let's get our Pacific Island neighbours, let's go and knock on the door of China and the US and Russia and say, global warming is burning our country, our rivers are drying up, our reef is dying, we need a global effort to get out of coal, we're prepared to lead it, let's do it.
Unbelievable. Just as silly is Bandt's plan to replace coal and gas with a viable renewables industry. Here he was in September on Insiders.
We need a plan to phase out coal and gas by 2030 and instead...
Within the decade.
Within the decade. We could get to zero emissions within Australia and become a renewable energy superpower that is exporting our sunlight instead of exporting our gas and coal. We end up with lower debt than most OECD countries, and we end up with full employment and 100% renewables.
So about 200.
That, in a nutshell, is his plan to replace the coal and gas industries, which are worth $130 billion a year. Yes, he proposes to abolish them by exporting sunlight. Adam Bandt has no place as a party leader. In fact, he has no place in Parliament, or even a town council for that matter. But he does show promise as a comedian.
Well, I want people to understand before the next election that we are the only economically sensible party.
Rita and James, any surprises to you that Adam Bandt would sell out the country and tell South Korea to stop bringing jobs to this country?
Well, no, the Greens are mad ideologues. We know what they are, what they stand for. We know about some of their, communist leanings, never mind socialist. I mean, they've had communists in their party as members and as representatives. So this is an extreme party. Sadly, though, I think they've been successful in dragging not just the Labor Party, but also the supposed Conservatives, the coalition, to the left in trying to hold on to a handful of inner city seats that have really sold out the great majority of people who don't subscribe to those views. But that's what we're seeing. I cannot believe a party that gets less than 1 in 10 votes has been so successful in really changing the agenda of the major two parties.
Well, you have to think, Rita, about the people who are attracted to the Greens. And I mean, there's sort of two groups of people, I guess you could say, who do that. Number one, they're your feral, great, unwashed share house, feral, whatever.
I'm glad we've got feral back in the Outsiders Guide. We're going to have feral.
And those groups, but then the other bit is there's always among I guess you'd say the posher classes always this sort of desire to take sides with anybody except your own country, and we saw that during the Cold War and all of the very well-bred people who decided to go throw their lot in with the communists because that was all very posh and hip, and of course the communists, as Rita alluded to and you alluded to, and I was very glad to see that we got Leon Trotsky in there, is a group that just simply is a successor organisation to the Communist Party of Australia. And many of the people who had been attracted to the CPA now find themselves in the Greens. And it's a funny thing, you go to certain areas of Sydney and Melbourne, and you'll see people with, come election time, $2, $3, $4 million massive houses and massive terraces in very posh areas with vote one the Greens out the front. And of course, because what it has become for them is, it's a statement of class as much as anything else. And the interesting thing you'll note, obviously, and we've spoken about this before, Rowan, is that there are those moderates in the Liberal Party who are culturally far more attuned to Green sensibilities than they are to Conservatives within their own party. We've seen this in New South Wales, where certainly there's no small number of people in that parliamentary delegation who would rather spend their time fighting Conservatives than fighting the Greens. And
what I don't understand is these people who do live in these inner city concrete jungles in their $3-4 million properties. If you love the environment so much, then live amongst it. These people live in the least green parts of the country where you can barely find a bloody tree, let alone a park. But, they've got no backyards, they've got no greenery, and they supposedly care about this issue more than anything. They're so divorced from it because, they're the group who stop backburning happening. When people who live in the bush, live in the natural environment, understand why backburning is necessary. Now, no one wants to set fire to a forest,
of course not,
but it's necessary to do it to reduce that fuel load so you don't have an out-of-control bushfire that is absolutely devastating. But if you're living in a concrete jungle and you don't understand that, but sadly you're running some of these government departments that make these decisions, really...
But for them, it's, you're absolutely right, Rita. But, for them, as much as anything, taking these environmental positions is a luxury item because, as we know, environmentalism of the deep green sort that we're talking about here costs money, and it's very expensive. And, of course, they can afford higher power prices. So by saying that they're Greens, just saying, well, we can afford that, and the other people, the little people, can go hang.
Well, you're right, absolutely, Rita, that they would be the same people who would be going, oh, it's very hazy here today, when there's a little bit of smoke because of the burning off. So, the hypocrisy is writ large.